I'm president of Eisenhower Fellowships. We have an exciting day planned for you today, but I think if you're anything like me, a lot of us are still in the glow of last night, huh? What an evening. Thank you very much. Before we get started with our first panel today, as a recovering journalist, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce a true living legend. To say that Juan Luis Cebrián is a giant in Spanish journalism and letters would be too modest a description. He is chairman of Prisa, the world's leading news, education, and entertainment group in Spanish and Portuguese. He was founding editor-in-chief of El País, the global Spanish-language newspaper that gave us very generous coverage this morning's edition, if you saw it. Prisa, El País, and Juan Luis all played a crucial role in the political transition to democracy in Spain after the death of Franco. He is chairman of the El País board. He's also served as president of the International Press Institute, the Association of Spanish Newspaper Publishers. Author of many books, Juan Luis is a member of the Royal Spanish Academy and of the board of the French newspaper Le Monde. He's honorary professor in several universities in Latin America and Dr. honoris causa at the Juan Carlos I University in Madrid. He has won awards and accolades too numerous to mention in Spain, France, and Latin America, including the First Amendment Award from the Eisenhower Fellows of Spain. We're honored to have with us today a true friend of Eisenhower Fellowships, Juan Luis Cebrián.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you, George, for your kind presentation. I wouldn't like to be a legend because that means that I am in the age of legends, and that is something that I am very proud to be, but I would like to be in the legend of the future. So, welcome to this city where my group has Radio Málaga and, of course, El País correspondent. I'm going to give you only some small ideas about what is happening with the future of journalism, which is really changing after the new technologies and what it is going on with digital discoveries. So, in fact, the first communication media of the world it's not producing any content. It's Facebook. It's where most of the people in the world are reading the news, watching the news. They don't have any journalists. They only distribute what the other people do. But they get more than 80% of the advertising media in digital. Well, it's not strange. The largest cab company in the world has not only one car, which is Uber. The largest television in the world has not only one small studio, which is YouTube. The largest bookshop in the world has not only one book, which is Amazon. The largest retailing shop in the world has not only a small store, which is Alibaba, and so on and so far. So we are facing a world where the civilization is changing, and that it is affecting everything. That is affecting the world because it's affecting the producing and the distribution of goods and services all over the world. So media are suffering a lot, but they are, at the same time, they are having a real opportunity for the future. In the short term, we are suffering a lot. In Spain, we have lost at least 15,000 journalists. They have lost the jobs, not only the journalists. The kiosk owners, the bookshops, the distributors of paper. When we are talking about that the newsprint papers, the papers are going to disappear and going to be only digital, we don't imagine how much that is going to affect the work. The machines, the rotatives, the buildings where there are the machines, the producers of newsprint and paper, the stores where the paper are stored, the cabs where they are distributing, the thousands and thousands of people are going to lose their jobs because their jobs are changing. At the same time, there are new opportunities that are affecting also the traditional media, newspapers, and how the public opinion is creating in the democracies. The barriers to create a media of communication, they don't exist anymore. Many of the journalists that they lost their jobs, they are creating their own blogs, their own confidentials in the net, etc. And what happens is that the quality of the information is coming down because they don't have in fact, the possibility of hiring specialists, sending people on the ground to report on wars or to report on difficult situations. There is a lot of fake news. Nobody knows what it is true, what it is lie on the net. So how the future is going to be. And the public opinion is like it is. And now we see what it is happening with fake news, not only in the States, but everywhere. The so-called alternative facts, like even the White House is telling about, the discussion about what it is true or not. In this country now we do have real, very important discussion about the future of Catalonia. And what it is funny is to see that the arguments from the independents are the same arguments from the government. All of them are in the name of democracy. And in the name of democracy, they are confronting and they are doing completely different things, you know. So the problem of the future of work is not only what it is going to happen with the people, that they say that 50% of the current jobs are going to disappear in the next 2 decades or so, and that salaries are coming down, and rights of workers are coming down, are disappearing, unions are disappearing, workers are creating a new class. 1 century ago were the proletarians. Now, today, they are the precarians. You know, the precariat is the real new class for the workers because it's very difficult to find a job that it is lasting for 10, 15 years with a wage salary every month, with holidays on summer or whatever. They are autonomous people changing the job and the place to work every time with less rights, with no unions, but at the same time with more freedom and liberty for them, for the individual capabilities, for individual possibilities to work. That is happening, of course, in media. But what worries to me more is that for sure, in the future, perhaps there will not be newspapers, or we don't know. Professor Meyer from the Memphis University says that in 2046, newspapers will disappear. Will disappear because there will not be people that would like to buy newspapers. Below 35 years old now, very few people are buying newspapers. They are watching newspapers in digital terminals. They are looking at TV, and that is going to affect every media in the world. But newspapers as such, the newspapers we understand and we still, the legend people are reading every morning with the coffee in the breakfast, they are going to disappear. And that is going to affect the creation of public opinion. And in fact, it's affecting already, because this fake news and because the discussion what it is true and what it is not. And that will affect the function of the system, of the representative democracy, which is the most important crisis we are suffering. When we watch not only the States, Europe, everywhere, we see that the system, in fact, is under attack, that democracy, state nation and democracy are on crisis. We don't know what it is going on in the future. All these movements of referendums, Brexit, whatever you like, they have to see what the fact that people are improving the participation in the decisions, but at the same time they don't get the real information they do need to make a choice, you know. So if we talk about the future of journalists, and I will finish with that, I am sure journalists will last. We will have journalists in the future, but newspapers, it's very doubt. How the people are going to discriminate between the quality journalists, reference journalists, journalists that it is telling the truth, that it is questioning the power statements, that it is doing critics, but fundamental critics, not just opinions that they are giving by themselves, that are reporting in a conflict about the two sides or the three sides of the reporting that are really looking for truth, is going to be very difficult in the future. So we are going to pass at least 5-10 years of confusion about how to organize, how to recreate the democracy. Information media have been fundamental and are fundamental for the function of the representative democracy. President Jefferson used to say, because our government is based on public opinion, between a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I would prefer rather newspapers without government. Now the whole system is under threat, but at the same time there is a huge opportunity to enhance democracy, to enhance individual rights, if we are able to systemize and to organize Internet and the public opinion in Internet. Thank you very much. I hope you will have a good journey, and thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And as a recovering journalist myself as well, I completely understand everything that you said and agree. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. How was the dinner last night? I had to miss it. I heard it was amazing. Wonderful, wonderful. Let's see. So we've got a fantastic day planned ahead. The first thing that we're going to do this morning is have another panel that we're going to talk about demographic shifts and labor mobility and how that's going to impact the future of work in our societies. Finding meaningful jobs and opportunities for refugees, which are another important category, and other underserved populations become an issue really around peace and stability. So the panel, which I'm going to turn over to Dina Sharif, and actually call Dina up now, we'll explore also how women's roles will shift in the future workplace. So I think that that diversity conversation is so important as well. So Dina, I'm going to leave it to you to call your panel.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't need this to have mine.
Yeah.
So can I invite my panelists up? First of all, good morning. I think only Eisenhower fellows can sleep 4 or 5 hours and still make it here on time.
Well, you sent it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that I'm really proud because all of you who heard Claire Marie, she was in my program. I'm a 2015 fellow. I think we should give her all another round of applause because she's quite phenomenal. Thank you, Claire Marie. Okay, so I'm, again, Dina Sharif. I'm the CEO of a company in Egypt called Ahead of the Curve. We do a lot of work on responsible business practice, social entrepreneurship, and job creation for youth. I think this particular panel is incredibly important for where we are today because not just of demographic shifts in migrant workers, but because of the huge refugee problem that we have today, specifically the Syrian refugee crisis. So as we talk about labor mobility and how we can better utilize migrant workers who are moving around the world as a result of globalization, it's very important to think also about what is happening with refugees and how we're creating jobs for them. I just wanted to start off, because I'm partially a researcher, of some very important statistics. So 1 in every 113 people in the world today is a refugee. 1 in every 113 people in the world today is a refugee. Around the world, somebody is displaced every 3 seconds. So in 2015, the number of international migrants worldwide, people residing in a country other than their own, had reached 244 million people. So these are pretty significant numbers and things that we have to deal with, as we also think, kind of in the background of what we talked about yesterday, that technology is going to also make a lot of jobs go away. So I have great panelists with me today, and I'm going to ask each of them to quickly introduce themselves as opposed to me reading out their bios. But to my left, I have Stefano Scabio, who is the president of Mediterranean. Can we start with you? Quickly introduce yourself.
So thank you very much. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm the president of the Mediterranean, Eastern Europe, and Northern Europe. Actually, it's Europe plus, some southern countries in Africa and North Africa as well. So it's a little bit a bigger responsibility, plus Russia and the former countries from Russia. Actually, I'm 14 years with Manpower Group, so we strongly believe in a sustainable, and meaningful employment. This is our main call in this very moment. So I'm looking forward to have this conversation with the panelists here.
So Stefano, can you quickly say what is the most significant problem you're working on within this issue of mobility today?
Of course, we are, as you can imagine, and we will talk, I believe, in a while. Our main challenge is building out, skills in demand for talent in this very moment, because many companies are struggling, looking at the right skills, and so this is our main focus at the moment.
Wonderful. And we also have with us Arvind Gupta, who is a Eisenhower Fellow 2014 Innovation Group, I believe. Can you quickly introduce yourself?
Good morning. Yes, 2014, the innovation, the troublemaking group, as we called. So I represent a group that was the first cohort in innovation. I come from New Delhi, India, and when Dina asked me that, introduce yourself in 1 minute. So, I
said this was
thought
very
to myself,
hard.
and I said, how would I like to describe myself, apart from being an Eisenhower Fellow? So I am a technology entrepreneur, a disruptor, who's been doing technology disruption since the age of 22. I was part of the team that built the first browser in the world. And since then, I've worked in Silicon Valley and in India. And now I think of myself as somebody who is working on the cross-section of technology, data, digital, and policy, and how it impacts the last person in any nation, any country, anywhere in the world. So how technology can really be used as an inclusive tool for job creation, for financial inclusion, for anything else. So that's the area I work in. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvind. And we have Ayoduji, and I'm not going to say this right, but Adewunmi. Ayoduji. So could you introduce yourself very quickly in 1 minute? I know you started a phenomenal platform, so.
Yeah. So good morning, everybody. My name is Ayodeji Adeomi. I come from Lagos, Nigeria. I started a company called Jobberman. It's an online job site about 7 years ago, and we've expanded the business together with myself and my co-founders. We've expanded the business to 7 other African countries. I'm a technology entrepreneur, and obviously one of the things that excites me the most is using technology as an agent, as a tool of inclusion, whether it's in creating job opportunities or providing access to financial services or providing access to healthcare services. And obviously, I think one of the things that I'm working on at the moment is how do we use technology to reduce the skills deficits on the continent of Africa? Because over the next 40 years or so, Africa is going to produce at least 1 billion people in the working population. And what does that mean in terms of whether it's going to be the biggest opportunity of our lifetime or it's going to be a nightmare?
Yeah. And just to drive that a little bit home for Africa, because I'm also from Egypt, let me just ask a question. How many of you in this room are above the age of 35? So pretty much everybody. That's great, me too. So I just want to tell you that all of you are right now, older than about 60% of the population of Africa.
Yeah.
So think about what that means in terms of jobs.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's hop into the panel. I'm going to be asking the panelists some questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you. So be thinking about what kind of questions you would like to follow up with to the panelists today. So Stefano, I think, a lot of employers in Europe are complaining that they cannot find enough talent, but yet, and that there's still a high level of unemployment amongst many countries. And that how many migrant workers actually exist in Europe right now. So how can we explain this mismatch of employers saying we have jobs and we need employees, but yet there's a high level of unemployment?
Yeah. Yes, first of all, we are seeing actually a bifurcation in the labor market, which is becoming larger and larger, and this is a big issue. So fundamentally, this has been driven by the skills mismatch, as you said. Technology is changing how the work gets done faster than people are able to reskill and upskill and keep with it. So this is, I believe, is the main challenge. If we look at our survey, we usually made an annual survey on the talent shortage with Manpower Group, and in 2017 up to 40% of the employers were saying globally they are not finding the right skills. So this is a big challenge, no question about it. So the question is that technology actually is changing the way we are living, the way we are working, and we are facing a skills revolution, Because I was told yesterday, I was not joining, sorry, because I was elsewhere. They told me there was a debate about, how many jobs we are going to lose in the next 10 years. I don't believe, we should be talking about how many jobs. It's so difficult to predict it, It's more about, we will have different jobs, and of course we need different skills. So it's more about the skills that we need in order to work in a different environment. So this is the question that I would like to pose to the floor. And the final comment, I do believe that as business leaders, as entrepreneurials, we need actually to embrace, a workforce training in this very moment, which is so important to really reduce this gap between the ones that have the skills and the ones that have not. So this is the main challenge that the main governments in Europe, especially in the southern Europe, where we have youth unemployment, where we have a lot of immigrants, as you said. For instance, we are in Spain today, 11% of the workers are immigrants. 16% of the workers in Italy are immigrants. So it's a big challenge, So we need to cope with all those challenges at the same time, and I do believe that the answer, could be in creating, and we will talk later on, we have some interesting pilot to share here, creating a steering cabinet between employers, professional HR company like us, and the educational system. So could be an interesting holistic cabinet, to try to solve this problem.
So let me just ask you a very small follow-up question, because there's a group of students at Harvard University right now. They created a platform called Dignify, and they make a claim that specifically refugees in Europe and a number of migrant workers actually have the skill sets required.
Absolutely.
But nobody is looking at those skill sets, and what they're trying to do is to create a platform where you can actually highlight the relevant skill sets of refugees. Do you have any comments on that, and why European employers are not specifically looking to these refugee communities for the skills that they're not finding within the market?
Actually, we are looking at those untapped talent pool, I would say, especially if we look at the Syrian. They are very, very good workers, very skilled workers. And we are running a couple of pilots in Germany, one, working closely with the government in order to really, try to teach them the German culture, because it's all about inclusion at the end. Even if they have a very good, they are very good at doing something, they are skilled workers, but at the end it's all about the inclusion. They need to learn the language, of course, which is very important. So language and inclusion are the two main things that we are looking at. And Germany is a pilot. Another pilot that we are running is in Bulgaria as well. But our spot, you are right, there is not a consistency, because you need to involve the government. And this is, for instance, in Italy. I'm Italian, but in Italy we were not able to make it. So it's really very difficult if you are not able to really involve the government in this project.
Yeah. Wonderful. So that's a perfect way to lead into Arvind, because you actually do a lot of work with government and public policy. So can you, Arvind, talk to us a little bit about what kind of public policy changes do we need to see within host countries of immigrant workers and refugees so that they can better serve these communities and integrate them? And how can we actually use digital policy and adjust it to create the kind of win-win situations that we need, both for employers and for these communities that actually exist?
Yeah.
It's a tough question, loaded question, I know.
So, I also am a semi-adjunct professor, so I know, that sometimes you don't have to answer the question directly. So I will start off with a few comments that I do want to make, and then answer as best as I could about that question. See, I think, a lot is being talked about technology being the disruptor. And yesterday, Tom Friedman's talk also, the interview also talked about that. I have a few points that I would like to say. That I think the bigger disruptor today is data. It is becoming the new oil. And I think why I bring that up is a lot of new wars in the world, whatever they call them, will be fought over data. And they're already being fought over data. Who controls data? Who controls data flows? And actually, what we are seeing is the amount of data we are producing in this room. You see all of us with their smartphones. And it will lead into the question. All of us are on Google or Android or a Apple phone. These companies, these platforms know exactly where we are moving. And it's all about data points. And they monetize that data in ways that we have never imagined before. So we are really, instead of a technology revolution, which is absolutely happening, it's a bigger data revolution. Just to give you some perspective, in the first 9 months of this year, we have produced more data than all cumulative data that we have produced over the last so many years.
7 years.
So many years, right? And that is really the very big point. The second thing is, you talked about Moore's Law. And I think Moore's Law has been broken. It's a reverse now. Moore's Law is now happening in 12 months, not 18 months. So what that is saying is that amount of data that we are producing and the power of computing that we are seeing out there in the cloud is just become, it's multiplying every 12 months. It's not multiplying 18 months. Now, and then you combine this with what I call the 4D rule. Now, 4D rule is very important. It's the rule of automation. And we talked about technology disrupting jobs. The 4D rule is that anything that is duplicate, dirty, dangerous, and delicate is going to be automated. So when Shahid said yesterday that jobs are at risk, we have this is the 4D that businesses are going to use to make themselves more efficient. Now, why I'm saying all this? Because this relates to the whole issue of technology being applied as policy for migrants. Now, migrants have no identity. That's the biggest crisis migrants have. And in today's world, with all this technology that is available, it's sad that countries are not able to agree. Countries, geographical boundaries are not able to agree on identity. But digital, electronic boundaries agree on identity. And the reason I say that is most of the migrants have some sort of a digital identity. what we need to make sure that these digital identities are recognizable across borders. And that's the first thing. And you know, technologies exist today of blockchain, and that's the reason I was mentioning about computing power. Because it's sad that, you know, migrants are facing a problem that they move. And, you know, India and Pakistan, I come from India, have faced the biggest migrant crisis ever, 70 years ago. 20 million people got displaced, highest ever in the history of mankind. And the biggest lesson was the doctor in one part of the world did not have his credentials recognized when he moved to the other part of the world. He was still a doctor. There was issues of language, where the certificates were written in what language. But with today's technology, it can be disintermediated. It can be put on a cloud and everybody can recognize that. Google does translation. When we speak, we go to other countries, we use translating facilities, but somehow it does not get applied to the lowest common denominator. So identity, credentials of skills, and third is a very big issue where technology has to disrupt the lives of migrants or anybody who's moving around the world, is money. People lose money all the time. You know, the paper currency becomes invalid. It's actually a cause of security and theft and life. How do we virtualize currencies and money that people will be able to use across borders and get paid in that get recognized across borders? And so really, technology has to work in an area. The public policy has to be cross-border, and it has to solve three fundamental things of I, M, and S. I is identity, M is money, and S is skills. And technology exists today. The digital giants probably can solve 2 or 3 of these problems. The geographical giants are not ready to do that. So I'll leave it with that thought.
Well, no, I'm not going to let you off the hook. Because that brings us to a very tough question, I think. And, you know, we wouldn't be Eisenhower Fellows if we didn't tackle the tough questions of, you know, it seems based on what you're saying, that the solutions are there to find better ways to integrate migrant and refugee communities across the world. But what we're seeing is that governments are not collaborating to do it or creating the policies to do it. So why do you think that is, and what do you think we need to do to get governments to find ways to create the right and smart policies to allow us to absorb these populations in a better way? Because the fact of the matter is, integrating these communities within the formal labor economy will lead to economic growth, both within a country and globally. So what are the barriers to that actually happening, in your opinion?
So see, I was, in a way, a legal migrant in the Silicon Valley of the world. I created many companies, created many jobs. I've never technically worked for anybody. I think where, you know, and on the other hand, migrants have been mostly, when the backs have been pushed to the wall, they've actually created jobs. They've been the leaders in innovation. Yep. I think countries are not recognizing that. And it's really because, for example, you know, what Stefano mentioned, or anybody mentioned, when we present them as migrants, but not as skills, we look at them as a pool of migrants who are going to take these jobs away, not create jobs. That is the biggest public policy issue.
So in other words, you think we need to have a shift from seeing them as burdens to sources of economic growth?
I personally feel that's what happens in the long run.
Stefano, I think, wants to jump in. Please.
No,
go
especially
ahead.
I fully support you what you're saying, and with technology we can really, you know, try to track, you know, them. But again, the cultural integration is the main challenge, you know. So how we can you know, do something in terms of training about cultural integration. This is actually the main challenge that I see when we are talking about the immigrants. And as you said, unfortunately, if we look at Europe, we need those people like hell, because the demographic shift that we are having, especially if you look at Germany, if you look at Italy, there are the oldest, the age population in Europe. And you know that demographics is all about mathematics at the end. Yeah. When you are below 2.1,
2 children per couple, so you are not able to have a sustainable growth of your economy. And the only country in Europe that at the moment is on the average is France, because of the immigrants, actually. So you see that we have some good example, you know, and for the other countries, will be a big challenge, especially for Italy and Germany, that are the oldest population. And we have 1.3 in Italy of birth rate, and 1.3 and something in Germany. So we are more or less at the same level. So this is about mathematics. It's a huge challenge. So we need to find a way to really untap this pool of talent and try to integrate the culture of those different countries and population, because it's so important for the sustainable economic growth of the future.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think, you know, in this space of looking at migrant workers and refugees, it's similar to how we look at youth in the Middle East. We have the largest youth bulge in the world with the highest youth unemployment rate, but we look at young people as burdens and problems as opposed to assets to drive our economy,
exactly.
which is the same way. So,
Let me.
Ayaduji, I'd like to. Do you want to comment on that before?
I just wanted to comment on that very quickly. So, I guess the issue around migrant workers and also the issue around youth unemployment is really comes down to one singular thing, in my own opinion, and I think that's the issue of education. So how do I, in a very deliberate way, looking at my niece and nephew grow up, how do I advise or maybe try and influence their education and really try and get them ready for what's going to happen in the next 15 to 20 years? And I think it comes down to 2 languages. One is the ability of the child to very quickly, maybe in the first 5 years, to pick a second language. And secondly, I think it also comes down to a computer language, because pretty much we can all decide to either ignore it, but it's really the reality of what's going on today. Yeah. That we're interacting with some level of artificial intelligence or deep learning or algorithms. I mean, we keep hearing all these buzzwords over and over, but at the end of the day, all the computers and the mobile phones and everything we interact with, even as we are here on this stage, a lot has to do with some of these technologies. And I think to be ready for the future of work, one of the most critical languages will be the language of computers. And it's really about whether you start influencing the child to understand how to code or have some understanding or appreciation of technology skills. I think those 2 things are definitely going to influence how competitive we're going to be in the future. Because just to give an example, in Nigeria, for example, a lot of the companies that have been hiring people remotely are actually hiring people with technology skills. You have remote workers, people that have maybe their parent company in Amsterdam or in San Francisco. I know of someone that has his parent company in Monaco, for example, and those people are sitting maybe from their rooms or from small offices in Lagos, Nigeria. So the question is, what makes those individuals that competitive for them to be hired in a remote fashion? And I think the big issue around youth unemployment, I think it comes down to one singular thing, which is skills. And what's the root cause of the skills issue we have in our hands? It's education. A lot of the education that we're experiencing, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria or Ghana, to be precise, these are curriculums that maybe the last time they were updated was about 30 years ago. So what are we doing about that? Let's say from a policy standpoint, what are we doing about that from an industry standpoint? And what are we doing about that as practitioners, as human resource or human capital providers? And I think until we start solving some of the first fundamental root cause issues like education, I don't think whether we're talking of migrant workers or we're talking of youth unemployment, I don't think these problems will be solved anytime soon until those things are addressed.
No, you're right. I think public policy plays a very significant role in this, as we were saying. But just to also follow up with you, because you created this platform to connect people with jobs. So what has your platform actually achieved over the past years, and what kind of employees are actually recruited through your platform? And what do you see for the future for your platform when it comes to tackling these issues of mismatch and people who are not able to find jobs through your platform and integrating them more?
Yeah, thanks, Dina. So in a nutshell, the platform is a marketplace that matches job seekers and employers. And over the last 7 years, in aggregate, we have placed over 500,000 people in jobs on the continent. And in terms of profile as well, it's the persona of people that get hired on the platform are typically a 21-year-old to about a 47-year-old that is either looking for his very first job or is looking for his second or most times third job, that gets on the platform, get registered on the platform, and start applying for jobs. And typically, on average, I think companies come to a site and they use the platform maybe about four times a year. But some of the biggest challenges that we're faced as a business is, for example, in Nigeria, there's just a lot of people that are looking for jobs. But unfortunately, these people are unemployable. So there's also the issue of underemployment for a lot of, even for the people that are employed, because the skills are not just there. I mean, the issue of people just being unemployable because they just don't have the barest minimum for them to be productive in the workplace. So I think in terms of where the challenge is for us as a business is really, okay, how quickly can we upskill some of those people? And obviously, we're doing things around creating virtual career center and how we can, as much as possible, try and address some of the challenges.
So you'll be moving into skills building and helping?
Absolutely, yeah. Because that's just the way out. That's the way out.
Yeah. And then one last tiny question is, are you doing anything to connect potential employees beyond the continent of Africa, or mainly just in Africa?
Yes.
So in other words, African refugees that have left the continent and are settled in other countries outside of Africa?
Yeah, so we do that. We're a member of the network, which is the biggest network of employment platforms in the world, and that gives us access to roughly about 100 countries. So definitely we're seeing a wave of that, people that are trying to go abroad, but yeah, at some points they end up coming back to the continent.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that we've also seen is some of those people that have come back to the continent are now adopting the sharing economy. So things like, okay, after they're back on the continent, how do they pick up their lives? And a lot of them have actually been adopting technologies like Uber to get themselves employed. And some of these people that are skilled are actually getting on platforms like Upwork. So Upwork is a global freelance platform that allows you to be able to trade your skills in exchange to be paid typically on an hourly basis or on a project basis. And alone on the continent in Africa, Upwork and Freelancer, they employ over 250,000 people that get some level of whether it's short-term assignment or a monthly contractual kind of assignment, on an annual basis, which is very transformative. And I think increasingly at the end of the day, a lot of the people, whether they are refugees or not, that get employed and stay employed, and they do well over time in their careers, are people that, they're constantly changing and constantly increasing on the quality of skills that they bring to bear.
Or also, people looking for jobs maybe also need to shift mindset and find different and alternative pathways to seeking employment that are outside of the 9 to 5 working for a company or a government. And so Arvind, I know that you've been, you wanted to make a comment, so I'll let you.
Yeah, I think the role of government is being overplayed in the skilling issue for sure. Again, we have the same skills and matching the skills to jobs problem, but I think the biggest skill that, especially the groups that we are talking about, migrants and refugees have, they're hugely motivated. And today, what we have seen with experiments is once you make access available, digital access available, people learn with the right motivation. If they have the right motivation, they learn themselves.
Yeah.
There is enough content available out there. I mean, Sabrin talked about YouTube being the biggest. Today, people, I mean, if we have to search for a problem to how to solve this, I do a how-to on YouTube and I get that solution most of the times. If not, I create it and put it out there.
Or Khan Academy.
Or Khan Academy.
I use that a lot too.
Yeah, and you know, what we have seen, and I want to give this example, is motivation is the biggest change, and if you give them the right digital access. We saw people from remotest parts of the world downloading Khan Academy lessons on a small SD card and putting it in their tablets and sharing it with everybody in their village. And people consume content if you give them access to it. But the biggest thing that was lacking was motivation. So I think we underplay that role. And I think the other very interesting thing in that is migrants and refugees globally have the highest motivation to succeed.
Yes.
And so it's really the access that is the big challenge once they travel where they travel.
Yeah. So Stefano, this was a perfect lead into you, because I know that you're thinking about ways to really upgrade skills and to find solutions to prepare the workforce for what is coming tomorrow, but also to prepare the workforce for today. So can you share with everyone your thoughts on what is needed to actually prepare the workforce and upgrade their skills?
No, I'm following what he was just saying now, that I believe is very important, and I do believe you are absolutely right, because one of the most important skills is about learnability, you know, the ability to continuous learning, you know, new things. And the immigrant especially, you're absolutely right, they have a very high LQ, you know. It's not anymore about EQ, you know, what do you know, but it's about what you can learn, because business cycles are becoming shorter, and the impact of technology, as we said, is going to become, higher and higher. So we need to be able to develop the learnability skills, adjacency as well, and agility, which are really very, very important. And of course, one of the important things that we are actually training at the moment is soft skills. So skills, are really key nowadays. I don't want to say that hard skills are not, but if you interview someone, 63% is about, and this is statistic, is about soft skills. So your ability in problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, is something very important that you need to look at nowadays in order to get a job and to find a job. And why soft skills are so important? Because business models are changing, and when you are working for a company, you need to work much more for projects nowadays that are horizontal in a company, so you need to work with a team, and that's why, you are not used to work anymore vertically, like in the past, and companies are becoming flatter. Of course. And so this is so important that we are able to work in teams and we develop those skills for running new projects, and innovation.
It's very, very important. So, Arvind, I wanted to come back to you because you said something earlier about the entrepreneurial potential of migrant workers and refugees. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how we can actually capitalize upon that and actually showcase ideas and solutions that migrant workers can actually present in terms of new business ideas, innovation, and so forth and so on within host countries, and why we're not capitalizing on this. And, you know, including in Silicon Valley, I think a lot of the big companies there really struggle because they want to keep these migrant workers, and policies are not necessarily on their side, although they're often the source of great ideas and innovation.
So Dina, I can't comment on what's going on in Silicon Valley. I think people who have joined us from the U.S. can comment on what President Trump is trying to do or not trying to do. So what I do believe is that I'll give you a few related examples. We've seen migrant workers or people who move around wherever, across borders or within the countries, have I mean, amongst other problems, have, as I said, problem of identity. The second problem they have is of credit. They want to start a small business, they don't get access to credit. And the credit history is lost when they travel.
Yeah.
Their credit worthiness that was there in their local community because of knowing the people around gets absolutely lost when they cross any boundary. I think that's where technology has to intervene. You know, starting new businesses requires some financial push apart from anything else. And today with blockchain and shared trust available, you know, if you put it out there, people should be able to access your credit worthiness, should be able to rate you and give you credit based on how you've done in the past. These are fundamental problems. If you talk to actually migrants, and when they move around, if they want to start a small shop, they don't get access to capital. The second issue that faces is remittances. Same thing. I mean, cost of foreign remittances is so expensive.
It's so expensive, yeah.
You ask migrants, and I've done some work with migrant communities in Middle East. Sending money back home for them is super expensive. The cost of money is actually getting monopolized by a few people. I'm making a very provocative statement. Few people are creating data colonies, few people are creating payment colonies. We're getting colonized by few companies which want to control the cost of the transfer of money globally.
The transfer of money.
And this is where I think technology is absolutely going to disrupt how money flows. I mean, it shouldn't take 20% or 15% to transfer money from Dubai to India.
Yeah.
But it does, and migrants lose a lot of money. So both credit, shared trust has to go on a blockchain globally, and two, the money flows have to be brought down. The cost of money flows have to be brought down a lot. So why I bring this up is because we're talking about future of work, disruption, and technology is disrupting us in more ways that we can imagine. We have to use technology for good, which helps the migrant problems. And identity, I already said. And I think the other thing is, and I want to share a small example from India, the lowest common technology. We in India actually had 50% of population bankless. They couldn't do banking. They were migrants in their own country. Mm-hmm. Within a short span of 1 year, we enrolled 220 million people in a banking system using lowest common technology.
Wow.
A mobile phone, a simple mobile phone. And today, India is 100% banked.
It's phenomenal.
In 1 year.
It's phenomenal.
220, and this is not a small country we are talking about. So, the point I'm trying to make is, if the right leadership and governance and agreements exist, you can make changes at a scale that can never be imagined before.
Yeah.
So you're talking about migrants in Europe. I mean, Europe is much smaller.
Yeah, I agree.
And solutions are there. Just have to apply them.
Okay, maybe just to write
Yes,
on that,
I'll let
let me give a very interesting example on what you just said, David, around the issue of identity and how that relates to migrants. So when you look at a country like Estonia, Estonia is a very small country in Eastern Europe, but it's the first country in the world where they pretty much put registration. So registration to become either a resident of Estonia online. And I think it takes about 500 euros to become an e-resident of Estonia. But it does a couple of things for a migrant worker. Almost immediately, you can open a bank account. Almost immediately, you have the opportunity to have access to a property title. And almost immediately, that sense of ownership or sense of identity or sense of inclusion that we're talking about in terms of whether you're looking for a job, it also opens up that opportunity. So I guess it's just a question of time. And like we were saying, in terms of getting the right information and the right access to, for example, migrant workers. So if you have a lot of Syrians, maybe in Germany, for example, trying to get integrated, it's just a question of time when they know that, okay, there's an opportunity on the blockchain for them, using blockchain technologies for them to get to become an e-resident of Estonia. It's just a question of time. And I think most times, and we've seen this over the years, that governments are usually laggards, and already Estonia is leading the way. It's just a question of time before other governments are going to wake up and say, okay, there's an opportunity here. So I think it's already happening with technology, and I think it's just a question of time before other governments.
If I can make a small intervention, we've, as India, we've collaborated a lot with Estonia. Estonia is about 1.4 million people are e-residents. I do want to bring out, identity does not mean citizenship.
True.
And Estonia set that up. India follows that. India has 1.17 billion people, not citizens, having a digital identity today. It's the biggest digital identity systems based, and it's completely paperless and presenceless. The only thing that you need to prove that you are you is your 2 eyes, iris scan, or your biometric. That's it. And so if you lose everything, all paper, nothing, I can still prove I'm Arvind Gupta, thankfully. So what he brings about Estonia is all possible. It's there, it exists, and it's just the will to execute.
So I'm going to ask you all one final question before I open, well, maybe 2 final questions before I open the floor to the audience. So let's assume that we can really use technology for good to solve this issue of migrant and refugee populations that are unable to find work. Now, let us come to another point, which is actually 48% of the migrant community are women. So almost 50% of that population of women are women, and they have the highest burden in terms of unemployment. So as we move forward, what do you think we can do to actually close also the gender gap that exists within unemployment within migrant communities, and how can we better work to integrate women and to find them employment opportunities, but also how can we better work there are a lot of women entrepreneurs who are also migrants, and how do we use their ideas and their ability to innovate and integrate that within the economic growth of our countries and globally? Stefano, you want to start?
Yeah, good question. The gender...
Because actually in Europe it is almost 50% of the migrant community are women.
Yeah, sure, you're right. The gender parity is a big challenge, especially in Southern Europe, as you can easily understand. And as we said before, it's so important that we are able to increase inclusion of women in the labor market, especially coming back to my point before, because women, they are much better in soft skills than men, actually, and this is its good point, to include women in the labor workforce. Unfortunately, in the southern country, I pick up Italy because I'm Italian, you know, you have 36% of women working at the moment, which is the lowest in Europe, you know, the lowest. In Spain as well, you know. But all the southern countries have a challenge to include women. But it's again about the culture, you know. So it's a cultural challenge that we have here. And this is a pity because we need to be able to change this culture and try to include as much as possible, because we need, you know, more women in the companies. We need more women also as an entrepreneurial with completely different set of skills. And this is something that we need to look at very closely.
Yeah. Arvind?
Yeah, I have a
Any ways for technology
And
to
it's
fix
not
that?
only about law, you know, because you can push by law, but this is at the end, it's not happening at all, you know, even if you are saying that you need women in the workforce.
No, I think we still have a very strong unconscious bias that it continues to exist even within the formal economy, even within local populations integrating their own women, let alone migrant women within the workforce. This is a very real issue. So Arvind, any thoughts on how technology might be able to?
I think it's the bigger, the limited point I want to make on this is the issue of course, cultural integration, but also safety and security, both ways.
Yes.
And I think whether it's migrant women or just resident women, I think the secure and safe environment for them, a workplace, is primary, and it works both ways. And people are not, I think unless we create that, you would not have, especially the migrant women who as it is are under some sort of a stress, need to come and find a place. You have to have a better, more secure environment. I think it's easy to say technology can solve all problems. I would like to say software is eating up everything, but this is one area which probably is not. And there need to be real governance issues and real leadership in ensuring that women can be incorporated more into the workplace.
So what role do you think men can play in that?
Hire more women. In fact, I have a confession to make. I have to, Kathy from our cohort she pointed it out that, this panel also is a manel. And so, we have to get more conscious of that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Kathy.
But also in terms of, if I can, also in terms of, what the government can do in terms of, improving the work-life balance, because this is very important. Because if you look at the cultural issue that we have in the Southern Europe, women 2 times in their life are out of the work because they have children and they have not a lot of support, during when they are pregnant, they are at home and they have to take care of children, and then when they have to take care of parents at the end of the when they became older. So this is actually our 2 moments where we should do something more in terms of work-life balance and support, in order to help the women to be integrated.
Yes, and also support men to play the same role, I think.
And support men to play the same role.
So I'm just going to...
Can I make one intervention
No,
here?
can we move on to Ayaduji, because he's been wanting to make... And then we'll come back to you again,
Sure.
You want to talk about women, I know.
I just wanted to know, quickly say this, that I think the shared economy that he is talking about, and the fact that a lot of telecommuting is available today is really helping. Shared economy, if the numbers, if you see, a lot of women are contributing to the shared economy, and that may not be jobs, but that's work.
That's
It's
what.
absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely. Ayaduji, do you want to make a final comment and maybe what your platform is doing to help reduce the gender gap in terms of employment?
Yeah, I think the gap has always been there everywhere, whether it's in Nigeria, Africa, or other parts of the world. But one of the things I've come to have an appreciation of is the issue about gender. It has to be very deliberate, and I think it starts from myself as an individual and also what kind of responsibility I hold to the organization. So for example, in our own business, pretty much about 6 out of every 10 people that we hire end up being a woman. And the reason, I think, are just very obvious. There are just a number of qualities that, fortunately, some people will say, unfortunately, women can do better than men. And when you have an organization when 6 out of 10 are actually women, some of the issues that are being raised are, okay, when these women are actually on maternity, what happens? Who gets to do the work? And so we have been very deliberate as an organization in terms of just looking at what are the policies that we put in place. How can we have an extension with respect to, instead of the 3 months, can we do it 6 months, where the first 4 months is off-site, and then the other 2 months you have the opportunity to come in a couple of days a week. So I think those are the conversations that has to be had. But
And are you having them with the employers?
yeah, we're having them. I mean, as an organization, we're having them in forums where we have the opportunity to be able to talk to industry. We also have those kind of conversations. But I think they are very difficult conversations to have and to influence on a more broader basis, because fortunately and also unfortunately, a lot of people that are making these policies are men. So to be able to really get maybe a mass adoption of some of those policies, might take some time. But I think it takes a drop in the ocean to actually make the difference. And I think these are some of the issues that are still going to be there for quite some time.
Well, we hope not for quite some time, but all right. So let's open up the floor for questions from the floor. So we'll take 3 questions and then we'll
Women
have
first.
Panelists respond. Whoever raises their hand first. So we'll take 3 questions and then we'll go for another round. Okay. So go ahead.
Hi, Rickard Damm from Sweden, fellow. So sometimes I think that the future is sometimes happening while we're looking another way. So it's like happening behind us, and we're sort of on a stratosphere where we're not seeing it happening sometimes. So this is just something that I want to plant as a question here a little bit, is that I've seen 2 distinct things happening here, and you're talking about, now you ended up with the inclusion part, and when I talk inclusion, it's not only about women, it's also about migrants and people that are sort of underutilized or underserved, whatever you want. So I think there are 2 factors. It's like this death of 1,000 needles. You can't just like have one. Technology can't solve everything. Like, you have to have different things. So maybe there are 2 things I want to ask. It's like, how do we renew the social contract in our society a little bit? And this has to do with, like, for instance, in Spain, Italy, these countries, how about universal child health care from 1 year old for everybody for free? Like, that's one thing that could be a really big thing. That's an investment, yes, but it also is an inclusion thing. Like, how do we renew the social contract as such? And then also stigmatizing the sharing economy is something that's going on very much in our society from politicians, because you are listening to very strong lobby organizations from strong industry groups. So people are not able to run their own small taxi business with Uber because the French government is sort of listening to the lobby organization. Like, it has to do with each other here. Like, how should governments and how should companies try to start looking at the social contracts and also the stigmatizing of the sharing economy?
These are questions for all the panelists. So
I think so. I think I would like to hear from Mr. Manpower here first, and then
Mr.
who's
Manpower.
yeah.
Okay. So Stefano, you'll remember that.
No, you are.
Well, no, we're going to
sorry.
take 3 questions and then we'll go. Over here in the middle, or actually over there in the back, we'll take a woman. You're welcome.
I find an ambiguity in how you've expressed yourselves. You talk about, all of you to some extent, technology changing the way we work. Technology can solve anything. And yet, in my opinion, technology itself is value-free. It can be, in fact, we get the technology that we want, and we use the technology the way we want, whoever we is. So my question to you is, if we, the collective humanity, are actually driving the technology that we have and the uses that we make of it, probably what we're saying as humanity is we don't much like some of the technologies and how we're using them, or we're sub-optimizing their use for what we do want through the sort of future questions, the social contract questions that were just raised there. So my question is, how can we, collectively as humanity, how can we use the new technologies to do, I think, two things? One is to make governments, which are our governments, whether we like them or not, we put them there mostly, how can we make them more effective at influencing and achieving the policy objectives that we want and responding perhaps faster than they currently are to some of these challenges? And secondly, because governments do move more slowly, how can we use the new technologies, we as humanity, to influence companies so that they're not just short-term shareholder value focused, so that we force them to actually have a broader six capital, if you like, focus in terms of their output? How can we make sure, A, that's illegal in many countries, and B, for us as consumers and citizens to almost make that happen?
Thank you. Two excellent questions. We'll take one last question, and then we'll have them. So I'll come back to you in the next round, but we'll hear in the middle, right here. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, as far as I'm concerned, in my own experience, the digital divide does not exist. I mean, I'm as well connected in my home in Ghana as I am when I come to the US or as I am here. And the question I want to bring up is the role of technology in sort of recruiting the diaspora, because the diaspora has significant workforce that is sometimes better trained than the local workforce that we have in our various countries. So what your thoughts are as far as technology is concerned, recruiting the power of the diaspora in bettering the economic environment? The other thing was, I've been just struck by the talk about demographic shifts, and I've been struggling with this question throughout yesterday and today. We're talking about environments where the population is imploding and environments where the population is exploding. But all the infrastructure and effort into generating employment and jobs is in the environment where the population is imploding. And we all know the numbers. So what can we do? How does technology guide us to start looking really, where the 1 billion jobs are going to come from?
Thank you. Okay, so I'll ask you all to answer the questions very concisely. Stefano, we'll start with you. I think Mr. Manpower, you had a question to start with.
About the social contract, No, thank you for the question, which is very, very, very intelligent. But this problem, it's really hard to answer to your question, because it's one of the topics that we are talking, in the most important community. Is one of the topic of Davos, by the way, where business leaders are talking a lot about, the social contract, what we can do differently, So I believe that here I haven't an answer for you, because it's so big. The problem is that we need to really, as a business leader, as an entrepreneurials, to try, to understand that we need to change something, We see what is going to happen, the polarization on the labor market, the wage inflation that is actually is going down, even if we have unemployment in many countries, So the large population that is gaining, $2.50, in the world, 2.5 billion of people are gaining less than $2 per hour. So those are real big challenges, you know, to cope with the social contract that you are saying. So it's not, I haven't an answer, honestly. It's a big, big problem. I don't know if you want to say something about this, but, you know, it's a huge problem.
Yeah. Arvind? I think a lot of questions were targeting you, actually.
Yeah, and coming back to what the lady said before, you are right. I do believe that technology, you know, it's an enable. Technology cannot solve everything. Again, it's about human. What we can do differently, you know, to leverage technology in a different way. But again, it's about human, what we can do differently, you know. So I believe that, you know, we are actually in the human age, you know. For me, besides that we are talking about the disruption of jobs, and we are talking about, you know, technology that is taking over everything, honestly, I do not believe that human is still, you know, in the center, is key in this very moment, especially when we are talking about talent people, you know.
So, a couple of things I'll combine and answer from my perspective. Let's start with the digital divide. My friend asked, the digital divide is not about having a connection. It's about having the connection at the right cost. $2 a day is what 5 billion people in the world earn. They can't afford $100 a month internet connection. Yeah. So it's a cost of access. Right? And that's a very important aspect of digital divide. Two is the digital divide exists because most of the content is getting created in not a local language. 86% of India does not speak English. 90% of content is in English. Right? So the digital divide is not about having good internet connectivity only. It's about getting it at the right cost, getting content that you can consume in a language that you understand, and making it productive for you. I think that's a very important thing. And you know, to answer her question on technology with the government, I think you know, Stefano answered part of it, but the second part is, today, with social media, I think governments are becoming very accountable. There's a reverse bottom-up pressure that is happening globally because of this new power that every consumer anywhere in the world or citizen anywhere in the world today can, you know, can start tweeting, can put out tweets, and it becomes wildfire. Having said that, I think many experiments in decentralizing government, you know, we've experimented with something called MyGov. Now, MyGov is nothing but a crowdsourcing portal where we believe that every solution need not be only solved by the government, but by the 5,000 people who run the country. Can be disintermediated to you know, 500,000 people who probably are better experts in giving solutions. And it's very low cost. I'll give you a very brief example. You know, governments across the world generally hire an agency to make a logo for a new program. The Indian rupee has the logo. It was crowdsourced. The cost of crowdsourcing, $1,000. The cost of giving it to an agency, $100,000. So, and you know, all it took was a shake hand with the Prime Minister and a photograph and a $1,000 award, and that's it. You had a new logo, which was probably already selected by people because it was crowd polled, and you know, 500,000 people submitted their ideas. So I think governments are getting flattened by the use of technology. It just, you know, right technology has to be applied to right things. It can also be applied to creating fake news.
Yeah,
so, you know, you have to use technology the correct way.
The right way. Ayadu, did you have any comments on the questions? Maybe about the diaspora and how to...
Well, I think some broad comments. Technology itself, at the end of the day, is just an enabler. But we're also getting into an age where technology is becoming increasingly not just an enabler, but increasingly it's changing cultures, and also it's changing the way the world not only lives but also do business. So increasingly, that's one of the reasons why I said if I'm going to talk to maybe my 5-year-old self, I'm going to tell myself that I need to definitely pick up a computer language and not just a foreign language. On the issue of diaspora, I think a lot of people in the diaspora are obviously very conscious about going back to the continent. But obviously one of the biggest issues are usually, number one, the institutional gaps. Because when you look at Africa itself, there are definitely institutional inefficiencies, and we're dealing with weak institutions, whether it's rule of law or even getting things to work. In Nigeria, for example, pretty much you need to be your own local government to make things work, whether it's providing your own electricity or alternative electricity or providing your own water system. And people that are quite comfortable in the West or elsewhere usually have a big mental hurdle in terms of trying to come to really say, am I going to sacrifice all this to go back to whether to Nigeria or Ghana to maybe take a job that is going to pay me maybe 75% discount on what I currently had? So I think those are some of the issues and maybe mental challenge that a lot of people are actually facing at the moment. And that obviously is affecting the number of people that are ready and willing to go back to the continent almost immediately. But also, I think more importantly, is also a call to action. Like, if whatever you're doing, and I think it's not just the government, we should not, at the end of the day, outsource our future to the government, to say the government are going to fix all the problems in the society. I think for us as private sector actors as well, I know, Teddy, you're building a critical center in Ghana. Maybe in the short term, is it possible to actually be able to attract people, whether it's here in Malaga or elsewhere in the world, to come back, who are Ghanaians, to actually come back to work with you on the center, and then you can build a critical mass from there. So I think at the end of the day, for us on the continent, we have a lot of work to do. I think at the end of the day, people actually get the governments they deserve, and not the other way around. So it's really for us to raise the consciousness, not just within ourselves, but also especially within our circle of influence. And let's try and see how we can maybe get you in as the Minister of Health in Ghana, I don't know, maybe in 8 years or 4 years from now. But I guess those are where the conversation should lead, especially as we're talking about the diaspora. And one other comment, and I think this is the most critical comment I'm going to make, is when you look at the United States, for example, they say United States is a state of 50 countries. I see 50 countries in the United States. When you look at Europe, there are roughly maybe 30-something countries in Europe, and out of the 30-something countries, about 26 are within the Schengen, which from day one, as a 5-year-old, it gives you unprecedented access, unprecedented opportunity to about 5 international languages from day one, and then also the opportunity to be able to live and work in several countries. When you look at Africa, for example, Africa is one of the most disintegrated continents in the world, where you have a continent of about 50 countries, but it's almost impossible for you as a young Ghanaian to say, I'm going to Nigeria to go and work, or I'm going to Cameroon to go and study, because the free access and mobility of people across border is almost non-existent. And I think it's a question about mobility, it's a question about how do we fully leverage this talent, not just to talk to one another, but to do business across borders. And when you look at the contribution of Africa itself to global trade, is about less than 2%. Think about intra-Africa trade. Intra-Africa trade is still less than 20%. And when you flip the coin and talk about Europe, Europe is about maybe close to 60%. So I think a lot of the awakening has to happen amongst ourselves as against how do we even get the diaspora. People in the diaspora are already living another reality. So for them to be able to adjust to our own reality will be extremely difficult. So yeah, there's a lot of work for us to do.
Thank you, Ayodeji. I think we're almost out of time. Unless anybody has one last burning question.
Burning.
We have 3 minutes left, but if you want to ask it, you have to ask it in exactly 30 seconds. You had your hand up first, so I'll... But can you ask it in 30 seconds?
Yes, actually.
Less
than 30 seconds.
It's a comment that I will have to make, and it's on behalf of few women that are sitting in this row. And it's just a comment that we very much welcome Eisenhower 2015 Women's Program. And we were looking at the panel, so we very much welcomed the 2015 Women's Program. And now when we were actually looking through the panels that we have here, it was already pointed out by some of the panelists. So just as a comment from someone coming from a very sort of inclusive country where we also see actually gender equality moving backwards, I think the opinion leader, as the Eisenhower is, we should be extremely, extremely sensitive to this. And, well, I use the opportunity to thank that we brought a very global perspective to this panel, which I think has been very unusual and extremely, extremely interesting.
That's a good point.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So can you ask your question in 30 seconds?
We cannot hear you.
And I think we have 49 countries representing the Eisenhower Fellows. With the digitization, I think the basic thing we should have, like Arvind explained, the Indian situation. Now, I'm from Sri Lanka, an 86 fellow. I'm suggesting whether the Eisenhower Fellowship Group could promote this digitization process through regions. Now I'm talking about South Asia. I think Shahid and Rahman is here. They can discuss further later on. Like that European Union, I think is represented here. Most of the migrants today, what we are looking at news, is in that region.
Yeah.
Start with digitization, other things will follow, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think this has been a wonderful panel, and thank you all. And
Thank you.
I'll hand it over back to Kathleen, but I think there's a lot of food for thought for all of us as Eisenhower Fellows about how we can also think about all these issues within our own countries and regions, and how we can all work together to create a more inclusive global economy.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so food for thought, that reminds me, Mr. Mayor, I have to tell you, don't leave yet. I want to thank you so much for last evening and for dinner and all the social occasions. Have been wonderful. Now you can go. Thank you. And speaking of food, has anyone had these green olives that they give everywhere? I'm so addicted. I've got to figure out a source on how to get those sent from Malaga. All right. And so we acknowledge that you did have a late night dinner and that you might need some rapid pace content right now to keep the blood flowing. So we've got what we call the lightning talks, which are going to be different points of view from fellows from all around the world. and they're going to share in quick sessions an update on what they're doing now. So I'm going to turn the floor over to my gal here, Miata, who's going to start the lightning round. And this is going to capture your imagination and be very exciting. So it's going to be Miata, then Pedro, then Hiba. But I'm
Do you have the
we need the clicker. The other one. Is it up there? Oh, yes. All right. The stage is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I trained as a healthcare worker in Liberia, and over the last 9 years, I've worked in various levels of healthcare facilities, clinic, a health center, a hospital. In all those years that I served as a practicing nurse, I was taught to provide care, and every care that was provided needed to be appropriately documented. So as you can see in the picture, my tools were the clipboard, the pen, and the patient's chart. And I had to make sure that with the interaction with my patients, everything about their care were appropriately documented. But it's interesting because there were many days where patients would come to care and I would have to go about looking for the patient's chart. So that's interesting, right? So it meant that the patient would come to care and I would have to go through those hurdles to either identify where their chart is. As you can see, that's an interesting one. To be able to do that. What it also means is that the patient will have to be waiting while I try to get the patient chart. At that point in time, I knew later about the use of computer, like really, really later about the use of computer. And you may be asking yourself the question, why didn't she know about computer at that point in time? It's well simple. When I was taught, I saw my professors write on the blackboard. They didn't do a PowerPoint presentation. They basically wrote on the blackboard, and we had to take our notes from the blackboard. And over time, it became apparent that the way we were being trained was actually meant to fit what was prevailing at that point in time. So in the classroom, there wasn't a computer lab. We had to take very large books, try to read, no little papers, and all of that. But there's one good thing that we were taught, and that's really important. We were taught that every care that was provided to patients had to be appropriately documented, and that's key in healthcare. Today, we are fortunate to have an opportunity for the use of an electronic medical record system within our various healthcare systems. And what exactly is it? It's really the digital form of those many papers you see there. So there may be about 2,500 records, but those 2,500 records can actually be placed into a database that may be as small as a chip, that is easily accessible. It contains the patient's medical information, their diagnosis, their imaging and testing results. It has their treatment, their follow-up care, and all of the information you need at the point of care. It's actually a system through which provides you with prompt information at the point of care that is really accessible to healthcare workers to help them make an informed decision relative to patient care. Who are the operators of the electronic medical record system? It's us. It's healthcare workers. And that's unique. So thinking about it, the presence of the use of electronic medical record system, in my view, presents a perfect opportunity within our healthcare systems of how we can leverage technology to help improve patient care. So every country within their health information system does have an electronic medical record system component. And the healthcare workers, like I mentioned earlier, that are providing care are an essential point at which every information we use in the healthcare system is generated. So you may build a very nice system. If you don't have information that can be inputted into that system, there is no system. And that's where we as healthcare workers become very important. So we spend a lot of time with the patient. We know the patient's condition. We document the patient information. And I just break a little bit. If you're far away in a rural village, think about it in a rural village where you saw 3 patients today. One patient had measles, another patient had cholera, and maybe another patient had malaria. The moment you are able to document the signs and symptoms for those patients, the medication you provided, their condition, and with a click that information is transmitted, that triggers a response. So there are many things that we can do just so promptly with the use of electronics. So healthcare workers are key into this process. However, in taking use of this opportunity, there are things we have to do, and it's linked to a lot of the conversation of yesterday and earlier on this morning. Healthcare workers will have to be appropriately trained to use these technology. You cannot be expecting us as healthcare workers to become more efficient with the advancement of technology when we are not trained to use them. So you will have to train your workforce. And that starts with pre-service education. Like I mentioned in school, when we now start to build a computer platform for our nurses, our doctors, to become more educated and have new skills based on what they already have to use this system will be very appropriate for our system. So we have to do a lot of training. We have to build a new workforce, a workforce that we can have add-on skills, right? A lifelong learning. So I train as a nurse, but I've gotten a lot of skills through clinical practice over the last few years. And that's what we as healthcare workers will need to have to make the changes that we need within our various healthcare system. But also I like to note that the changes or the adaptation of new system is not going to come easy. There are lots of challenges, and if I reflect back onto our continent, there are challenges in terms of internet connectivity, the tools for you to use, where healthcare workers are placed in very remote areas. There are issues related to the infrastructure, and all of those things we have to confront with. But there are some very, very critical thoughts that we need to think about as we embrace it. One, when we think about systems, we never think about governance and leadership. So electronics, the internet, all these things become very fantastic, but we have to think about who's going to manage it. Who are the people that are going to manage the system? Who are the people that are going to fund the system to make sure it's sustainable? Who are the people that are going to actually make use of the information that is generated from the system? And most importantly, we should remember that as our countries embrace technology, the patients have to remain the center of care. The humanity part of what we are taught have to remain, and we should not move to a system where there's a patient sitting in the room and I'm on to my computer and I totally forget about the patient. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Pedro. I'm a fellow from Spain and a very proud member of the first and, for the moment, the only innovation cohort. So very happy to be here. First of all, I want to congratulate you guys for setting up this event. It's amazing. I'm really impressed. And I hope we get a chance to see many other events around the world like this. So I have 8 minutes to share 8 ideas, 8 plus 1. And it's not a lot of time, but I hope it will be food for thought for our next conversations throughout the day. The first idea I wanted to share is that change comes in waves. It's not a gradual function. It usually has bumps. And there's a relationship with generations. Baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, we tend to have a similar way of thinking, a similar way of working. We invent things, and we use the knowledge created by the former generation. And this is really interesting. Actually, Steve Jobs said that it was really healthy for the world that time will wipe out older generations and give place for younger generations to think fresh and also use the knowledge created by the former generation for their own inventions. I remember, and Kathleen, you probably remember this, one of the most popular covers that we had on Technology Review on the MIT magazine was a picture of Buzz Aldrin, one of the members of the Apollo 11 expedition, who said, you know, in my age, I agreed to travel on the Apollo 11 really far in a very small casket of steel because you told me by this time we would have Mars colonies, and instead you guys gave me Facebook. So let me talk and thank baby boomers, right? They made a lot of efforts to build the technology that we used to build the next generation. They were responsible for building the first digital corporations, SAP, software, the first databases, the first computers that we used on corporations were implemented by this generation. And they were responsible for the hype and the growth of a phenomenon called outsourcing. For the first time, we were able, through digital technologies, to take work from one place to another. And the main driver for outsourcing was the price of talent and also, you know, the capacity to reduce risk. But it was mainly for cost reasons. Then came Gen X. I guess there are lots of Gen X in the room. I'm one of them. We were born with the Web 2.0, with social networks. We are experimenting for the first time that every one of us has a cell phone. We are the connected society. And as a connected society, we reinterpreted the outsourcing phenomenon, and we created, or we pushed the growth of crowdsourcing. So crowdsourcing and Gen X are now taking the main spot in management, in large corporations and in small companies as well. So I think crowdsourcing is going to really transform the workplace the same way that outsourcing did 10 or 20 years ago. But this is a huge challenge because outsourcing is about connecting two companies. One large company sitting usually in a developed economy and another company, another very large company in a developing economy with different salaries and one connection point. But crowdsourcing is a one-to-many. It's connecting one organization with hundreds or thousands or millions of contributors. And this is a real challenge. How do you manage this? And this is my next thought. I think that in order to connect crowdsourcing or huge communities with corporations, there needs to be a middleman. And I think a good candidate for that middleman is consulting. Consulting has been working more or less with the same business model for many years, and it's a good time for it to be reinvented. I think consulting has a good side. You know, it gives the credibility to large organizations because you have a balance sheet, you have employees, you have a track record, you have audited accounts, all the requirements that a large corporation asks to a service provider to trust it with information and with an engagement, with a task to deliver. But at the same time, consulting used to rely on a few hundred or maybe a few thousand consultants that may or may not have a lot of experience in the fields that are demanded right now, but it has closed doors, whereas crowdsourcing will need open doors. So consulting should reinvent mostly their back end, the way they talk to the community, they interact with the community. The next idea I want to share is this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to build a consulting practice. We have around 150 full-time consultants, and we are turning these consultants only on the front end. We talk to clients through our full-time people. We build a methodology to run projects and a methodology to interact with the community. It's basically digital, a digital platform that allows us to identify people with the right skills, hire them, train them, certify their training, and assign them tasks, and then evaluate the work. I think this is an example. There are many other examples, and we heard about Hopwork or Freelancer. There are many other platforms trying this different ways. For the moment, I've seen many platforms that do brokerage or do connections one point, one consultant with one freelancer, or one corporate manager with one freelancer. This is actually tackling the core of consulting, is reinventing the core of consulting. Next idea, I think, well, I'm part of Gen X, and my role in society is probably to bring the good things about the connected society, about social and crowdsourced work to large corporations or to organizations. But I think there's a Gen Y, there's the millennials coming after us, and then there's Gen Z, the centennials. We don't know much about those yet, especially Gen Z, how they're going to behave as mainstream leadership, but we know that there is a new emergence, there's a new very important technology trend, which is digitalizing everything, digitalizing things, the Internet of Things. Can you try to think how leadership would look in a world where everything is connected, not just people? What kind of challenges and opportunities that will bring? And after that, there's another revolution. We're starting to see the changes that artificial intelligence is bringing. So what will leadership look like when artificial intelligence is mainstream? When everybody considers social networking and even the Internet of Things a thing of the past? I think, whenever there's a transition like this, an organization that works on a baby boomer model or a Gen X model or a Gen Y model, whenever there's a transition, there's an opportunity. There are challenges. There's usually crises like the ones we've been experiencing. But there's certainly opportunities and things to look at. My last idea, the 8+1, is I think we are experimenting a very interesting change in Eisenhower Fellowships. We're seeing the transition from baby boomer to Gen X. It's becoming more social than ever. It's becoming fresher. It's becoming more open. It's opening doors to people in different regions or in different age categories. But I invite you, and this is my last thought, I invite you to think a little bit further. How will the leadership and the work, how will the mission of Eisenhower Fellowships be updated if it's looked through the eyes of Gen Y or Gen Z? What will the mission of Eisenhower Fellowships be in 10 or 20 years when artificial intelligence becomes mainstream? So that's my thought. Thank you.
Well, I have a disclaimer to say. I was a fellow when I was at school, so I think I qualify to be part of Gen X, Y, and Z, or at least I want to think so. Well, good morning. It's great to be here and great to be in this forum, especially to connect, discuss, and try to transform with my friends, fellows, trustees, and esteemed leaders, especially the Generation X and Y. So I have 8 minutes and I have a very, very tough task, but I wanted to do it with you. I want to ask you and ask you to think about one particular thing, which is the day after tomorrow. We've been talking about technology, we've been talking about challenges. I want to ask you, are we ready? Not for today, not for tomorrow, but for the day after tomorrow. We are living in a very exciting time where technology is transforming our lives, the way we communicate, the way we think, the way we talk, and the way we are today and tomorrow. It is challenging. It is also helping us to, this new technology, address some of the fundamental issues in healthcare, in education, in environment. It is a facilitator. Rosemary, it's an enabler that will help us to transform. And actually, it is transforming. A lot of people, and Schwab and many of you are attending Davos, had heard him say this is named as the fourth industrial revolution. It's a disruptive era. It's a transformative era where, like 3 sets of technologies, whether it is the physical, biological, or digital, are coming together. They are blending, and they are allowing us to really address some of these fundamental issues. They are, as an example, empowering us as individuals, as citizens, to engage better with government, challenge government, and even come up with new solutions ahead. The change is so profound, and it is becoming the new norm. We've heard yesterday some discussions and debates about the whole digital transformation and why businesses are embarking on it. They're mainly, like looking at it to enhance efficiency, be more agile, and create room for innovation. It is yet to be proven, but we are seeing that most of the businesses are adopting this new technology, and it's clear from the numbers of these businesses moving to, like adopt the cloud computing and artificial intelligence and the others. And we are also seeing that this will not be stopping at the government, but like the academic institutes, the NGOs, the governments will also adopt the technology, but at different pace and form and size. Might not be happy with it, but it is coming. It is upon us. Yeah, I believe, and a lot of people in this room, I'm sure I'm looking at Shahid and Arvind, that we are at a crossroad. We are at a crossroad looking at the technology and the opportunities that it's bringing us, and how it is disrupting our lives, and how it is transforming everything. Well, we've heard about, whether we like them or not, but like, the Ubers and the Airbnb, they had disrupted the hospitality business, that they had disrupted, like the transportation sector without owning a hotel or a taxi. We've also seen the M-Pesa and Nkopa that were born in Africa, in Kenya, and it transformed the lives of people. It provided the opportunity for people to have access to banking and have access to electricity. It was a transformative. Now, today in Kenya, like the Nkopa is providing to more than 2 million people with power. They never had that. And it would never have been realized without the power of technology and the power of data, which is the new currency. And like reaching a lot of people to have bank accounts through their mobile, and it, and they export that to so many different parts of the, of Africa as well as other emerging markets. Or it had enabled young people who are living in slum areas, and these examples are from different parts of the Middle East and Africa. Whether it's Lillian, who got the opportunity after acquiring certain skills to have her own businesses, or Richard, who was a garbage collector and now he has a business in recycling, or Rosaline, who is now having her own a marketplace on the internet and selling her sandals all across the world. And examples are so many. But the question that I always ask myself and ask, people like yourselves, what does this mean to us? What does this mean to us in emerging market? There were so many questions the other day about, how technology is impacting us, the skill gap. My initial answer, and I truly believe in it, technology yet again provides us with an amazing opportunity to leapfrog. Now, more than any other time, is our opportunity to leverage the technology, to create new business models, to really allow more of our young people and, like the disadvantaged people to grow and to have a better opportunity. It will allow us to close the digital gap. It will enable us to have the Bill Gates of the world coming from Africa and the likes, and will allow us to cash some of the digital dividend. But as anything, with all these opportunities come a number of challenges. We've heard them yesterday, like people will lose their jobs. Yes, but this is not new. Sectors transform. Other businesses close down because of the evolution of anything. Infringement of privacy. And I can't remember who was speaking yesterday, and he said, with your phone number, there are 100 attributes. I just think about it for a second. These 100 attributes defines you and allow service provider to provide you with services or products that you want or like or need. It also brings the question of, inequality and the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and access. Today, and Shahid referenced that yesterday, we have more than 2/3 of the world population don't have internet access. We're talking about 4 billion. We're not talking about a small number. So yes, there are challenges. Yes, there is the cyberbullying. All parents are very concerned about that. Yes, there is the fear of unknown. Yes, there is the fear of terrorists and how they are using the technology. But I think, to me, more than these, and these are some things that we need to work on, we need to address, and, as Ronnie said yesterday, referencing Bill Gates, we need to act today and address these challenges. But I think there are also other questions that we need to ask ourselves, whether in emerging market, developing world, or even mature market. Do we really understand the new technologies and the trends? And we understand the benefit of these. We know the opportunities and how to leverage the opportunity, especially in emerging market, how to leverage these. Do we have the right skill sets and expertise that allow us to compete and, in this whole digital economy? Do we have the right workforce that enable us to be inclusive and to work from anywhere that we want, especially for women, which was the point that was raised, in the earlier panel? And do we accept that change is the new norm? It is the only constant thing today, and it will remain as well. I wouldn't claim that I have the answers, but I want us to think through some of these points. The mindset. There is an amazing book called The Growth Mindset, and I would suggest, if you have time, you just read this book. It's all about continuous learning, accepting, that you don't know it all, accepting that you can be wrong and you can fail in order to succeed. Technology will continue to disrupt our lives, so we need to understand it, and we really need to see what is best for us, whether emerging market, mature market, new markets, what have you. We need to trust technology. And during my days at Microsoft, we had an interesting equation. Trust equals privacy plus security plus value. So it's not only about the value that is bringing us, but it's also about, protecting our data, which is the crown jewel, and make it secure. Because, that is very, very important. We need to understand the opportunity and really cash on them and transfer the challenges. And we need to have the enabling environment, the right policies to allow us to innovate and not to block us as countries from using the technology. I think the data transfer, data flow was a very important one. We've got some policies today that does not allow for us. And in emerging market, I have to claim we don't have that much of the policies, and especially in Middle East and Africa. And, you know, like, I will call upon my friends and fellows and colleagues here not to adopt the ones in Europe or the ones in developing market. Have a forward-looking principles that will allow you to innovate, will allow you to leverage the technology. It's a journey that we must embark on, and we must think about it in a way that we'll have an inclusive technology, and because people can only benefit from the technology that they can access. I can't think of any better forum or any better crowd to call upon to embark on this journey. Thank you very much.
Heba, thank you so much. And thank you to Pedro and Miata for some great food for thought. And now, coffee. Coffee and iLabs. So what's going to happen, give me 1 second, and then I promise you get coffee. The iLabs sessions, there's multiple sessions, and there's going to be a listing up here with the places that you need to go. So in your program book, you've got descriptions of these different projects. They are real-world projects that we want you to contribute to here. And then there will be things that will be ongoing as well. So you've got descriptions in your book or on the Salesforce app. Pick the room that you want, get your coffee, bring your coffee to the room, and collaborate. Then at 1 o'clock, you'll come back here where we'll be having a lovely lunch with a fantastic speaker. So we'll have Jerome Glenn he's the CEO and co-founder of the Millennium Project. And he's quite a sought-after speaker, and I think you will really enjoy it. So enjoy the iLab session and your coffee. All right, I'll see you back at 1.